All right, for this week, we're going to be talking about the evolution of behavior, and there will be three videos for this one, and short videos, and then we'll have some things for you to read and watch for the week. So let's start with evolution, and when you start with evolution, you always have to start with Charles Darwin. I had mentioned him earlier in the first videos, and he came up with a very basic idea. Now, I want to make sure you understand this. He is not the first one to come up with the idea of evolution. Matter of fact, his grandfather had written a paper about it. A lot of people had talked about evolution. The problem with the idea was there was no what we call a mechanism. There was no way for it to work. There were a few people, and I'm not going to hold you responsible for them, but in basic biology, we talk about a guy named Lamarck that came up with a mechanism that giraffes stretched their necks, and then as they stretched their necks, they got longer, and then their children had longer necks, which is genetically impossible. So that mechanism didn't work. Darwin's does, and so that's where the controversy lies. But anyway, so the idea of changing, and so physically we can see those things, and what we want to do is kind of relate this now to behaviors, which is a little bit tougher to do. So just want to make sure you remember, we talked about the book before, The Origin of Species. The actual name is The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So lots and lots of words. Everybody knows it as The Origin of Species. And again, two main points, and I want to make sure those are clear: descent with modification and natural selection. Descent with modification is real simple. It means that you are different than your parents. There is genetic recombination, very fancy word, of taking your mom's genes and your father's genes and mixing them to make you. We will talk about that next week when we talk about genetics. Then the next one is natural selection, and that is, again, his mechanism. So I want to spend some time talking about the mechanism, natural selection. And if you say it, it really, you hear often survival of the fittest. So the question then becomes, what does that mean? And I'm going to give you a definition, and I want you to know this. It's called the ability to reproduce and have fertile offspring. And then who gets to reproduce and who gets to leave offspring. And so I have pictures of two male African lions, and I'm going to stop for just a second, take a look at the pictures, and who do you think the females are going to like? Now, if you're normal and honest, I am guessing it's the lion on the left. The one on the right is obviously a photoshopped picture of a lion with a primate's face. But anyway, so I want you to kind of get that concept. And so on the left, you know, that looks like a very, very handsome male, very large male, very strong male. And so we think of it in that regard, as, oh, you know, the strongest. But what I want you to realize is that it's not always the strongest necessarily get to that get to reproduce. And so I'm going to use the Lion King as our example because you learn all your information from Disney, which is probably not good. And so Lion King has all kinds of problems with the movie if you're a biologist. One is the animals break into song. Okay, that could be a problem. Another one is that Simba and Nala, the female, is his queen eventually at the end of the movie. Well, if you look at that, they are probably sisters. Brother and sister, and so, you know, there's a little incest going on. Disney's a little strange. And anyway, so here's two male lions, adult lions, and so the question is, would they both be left in a pride? We often have this idea that it's a single male and a lot of females in these prides, but that is not reality. There are what we can call lesser males, for a better term, I suppose. And the male will actually tolerate these other males because to protect the pride, it is necessary. And so there are often some other lesser males kind of hanging out. So the question is, who gets to breed? And I'm going to come back to that. And it turns out, and this is the concept I want you to know. They all do. The females are, and we're going to talk about this more with reproduction, but the females want to have offspring, and they want their offspring to have the best chance. So what they're going to do is they are going to pick the male that they think has the best qualities, that gives their children the best chance. But reality is you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So it turns out that the females may choose the dominant male, and he may have the most partners. But what we're finding out is all the males actually get to breed. Scar, you know, he's ugly, he's got scars, he's not a great personality in the movie, but he might be relentless. And when Simba is busy or looking the other way, he may sneak in and have success. So what I want you to understand is when we talk about survival of the fittest and this concept, it's that everybody gets to breed, but the more dominant male is going to leave more offspring, and those offspring are going to be more like him. So this is actually called differential reproduction. So let me say it again. I don't have it written up here, but it'll be on the study guide. But differential reproduction, it means reproducing at different rates. So those that are more fit leave more offspring. And then those offspring are more like, they have those traits, more like the dominant male. So here's the key though. So the lesser males are having kids, and they're kind of hanging out, they're surviving, maybe not doing the best, but this is important due to variation in the environment. If things change, what might be successful today may not be successful tomorrow. And so we need this variation because the environment does change, things do change. So let's say, you know, it's the big mane that all the females like. And so for years and years, you know, all the kids, you know, they have, he has 10 kids, they all have the large mane, and Scar gets lucky, you know, one female gives up and she's sleeping, so do what you want. And so he has one little, you know, little son, and he looks like Scar, you know, nobody likes him. But then all of a sudden there might be a mutation, there might be problems where all of a sudden, although Simba's, you know, a pretty boy, maybe he develops a body odor. And although Scar is, you know, ugly, maybe he smells good. So, you know, the females decide, hey, it's better if my male smells good. So what I'll do is close my eyes and dream of Simba while I have sex with Scar. But anyway, what'll happen over time then is you'll see a shift, because if that's the case, then Scar will be having more kids, and then the population. That's what evolution really is. It's kind of going through these filters, these environmental filters. All right, and so something that comes up with lions that I want to make sure you understand is the idea of infanticide. So I want you to watch this video. You know, there's a little gruesome in parts, but it's not too bad. But it talks about why they would do it, and so we'll have that discussion in the following week about why. So want you to watch that. All right, survival of the fittest. Again, just a quote from Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest that survive. It's not the most intelligent. It's the one that is more adaptable to change. So those that have the best traits to fit the going situation are the ones that tend to leave the most offspring. All right, there were problems. Okay, so this is sexual selection. And what we're going to call this typically is female choice. Now you're looking at a bunch of different animals here, and you see the male lion with the big black dark mane. That's typically what the females are looking for. But there's an energy cost to produce that. And then you got on the right, you have a frigate bird, and that bird has the big red neck that blows up and makes a lot of noise. And so that's what the females like. And again, that has a cost. On the bottom left is a pheasant, and you can see the bright colored feathers. Again, lots of energy to produce those feathers, but also to be brightly colored like that, it makes it very obvious that you know you're more likely to be picked off by predators. So as a male, why would you do that? Why would you make yourself a target? And then on the right, that is an elk. And if you look, you can see those huge antlers. Those have to grow up each year, and then they drop off. And imagine you're carrying that kind of weight on your head year after year, and just the energy involved in putting that in. So what the problem with this is you're talking about individual survival rates. This might not make any sense. Why are you putting all this energy into things like big hair is not going to make you more likely to catch an animal for food. Having this huge thing on your head has to be a problem. The bright colors attracting predators has to be a problem. So Darwin had issues with this, and actually it took a while to come up with an explanation for this, and this sexual selection. And this idea actually came out 11 years after the actual book. And actually in a letter after the year after The Origin of Species was printed, his exact words to a friend, and in the context of the letter, he was joking, "The sight of the feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick." And so there is the peacock tail, and people were losing their mind. It's like, how does that benefit you? Now, these birds can fly. I don't know what you know about peacocks. They can fly. Matter of fact, they're an African bird, and at night, the safest place for them is in the trees. So they will roost in the trees at night for protection. And so what they'll do is they'll fly up there. Now, it is hard with this big, long tail to fly. And so what happens is they got to get a running start. So you're out in the grasslands of Africa, and you've got this huge tail, the savannas, a huge tail, hard to get off. And Darwin just could not explain it. That does not make sense. But it does make sense with the idea of female choice. The females are choosing males with these big, huge tails. As a matter of fact, what they think they're looking for, what they're pretty sure is the eyes. They've done studies where they've cut these eyes out of their tails, and the females tend to ignore them. And then they've taken males with really crappy tails and actually connected all these little eyes, and also the females seem more interested. So the whole point here was to attract a female so you could reproduce. Again, that is the name of the game. Is to get your genes into the next generation. And I laugh because every species on this planet, that is the name of the game. I'm gonna give you a visual here. You're here because your parents had sex, and I'll give you a moment to deal with that. And I'm gonna make it worse. Your parents are here because your grandparents had sex. And I'm sure that's not a visual you want. They were younger then, just to let you know. But reality, that is what every species is trying to do. And it's funny because humans have almost changed. It's like we have, who's got the most toys? And so we are looking at humans in this light, and we really have kind of changed what our attitudes are about success. But again, for all other species on the planet, the only name of the game is to get your genes in the next generation. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in class when we do the discussion. But that actually ends the lecture for today. So we will stop the share, and we will then stop the recording.